You wrote a fascinating article on Heard yesterday, which I wanted to get you on to talk about in the wake of Black Lives Matter and George Floyd's appalling murder, and well, I suppose the race arguments that have been going on in this country since. We've had it over police brutality, over opportunities for people who are black or Asian or other ethnic minorities, but also over things like the issue of coronavirus and the higher incidence of deaths of people of colour from coronavirus as opposed to whites on average. And you wrote an article basically talking about how you really can't make a comparison on many issues between America and Britain, and how different we are in terms of our race relations, police, education and everything. Tell us what the key differences are between America and Britain, and why we shouldn't perhaps make really casual links between those two countries.
Yeah, I mean, we do have a very different history. The black population is very different in size. One thing, it's 3% of the British population, about 13% of the American population. They have the whole history of slavery and Jim Crow and segregation. We are touched by that too. I mean, after all, a lot of our black immigrants come from the Caribbean, which was sort of our deep south, you might say. So we're not untouched by these things, but we have, for example, on the segregation issue, almost half of black Caribbean men partner out with white women. The fastest growing group in minority Britain is people of mixed race. I mean, that is a suggestion, not just a suggestion, that is evidence that the whole question of segregation is, although not non-existent here, is very, very different. And I mean, if you look at police brutality, obviously we have a history. If you go back to the 1970s, the 1980s, the Brixton riots, partly motivated by legitimate opposition to openly bullying and racist policing of young black men. Now the situation is very, very different. We've been through a lot of processes in the last 40 years that have changed the situation. When you talk about America, I mean, for the last several years, about 1,000 people are killed every year by the police. About 1/4 of them are black. This is a society with a completely different tradition of policing. It's a society that is up to its eyes in arms, in weapons. In the UK, by comparison, I think the last year that we have numbers for, 3 people in the UK were killed by the police in 2018. None of them were black.
And I think in last year, there were 4, and at least 2 of them were terrorists actually in the actual moment of them, the Streatham attack and the London Bridge attack.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're saying that things are just incredibly different when people talk about police brutality, when people talk about the segregation and the relationships between different races in this country. It doesn't have anything of the same history. It doesn't have the same statistics that we are seeing in America at all, and it's rather lazy to make those comparisons. But there's also some new polling. Ipsos Mori released some polls about how tolerant and diverse this country is. I don't really like the word tolerant. I always think it means people are putting things up with people. But 10 years ago, people were asked about, for instance, do you strongly agree that someone has to be white to be truly British? 10 years ago, only 55% of people would say that. Now it's 84% would strongly disagree that you have to be white to be truly British. There's some other polling about, and again, these questions are supposed to be the real telltale about whether someone is really racist, but they just don't want to really talk about it. But evidence, things like attitude, how would you be happy for your child to marry someone from another ethnic group? And again, the difference, 2008, 41% would be happy. Now 70%. But these are 70% are actually totally happy, and another 19% perfectly happy. 89% of people. That would suggest not only that we are not largely a racist society, but that we have become less and less racist by an extraordinary amount in just the last 10, 15, 20 years.
I know, and that is not to say there are not still issues, there are not still biases. I mean, this is the standard response when you make all these points is that it's just the because racism has become such a taboo, it's just been driven underground. It's still there. It's just sort of has a different face to how it used to. I think that is to significantly underestimate the change and progress that has been made, which is also not to say that there are biases still. I think a lot of the data we have heard from BLM sympathisers over the last couple of weeks are deeply, deeply flawed. There's the sort of standard approach is this, that you say, look, the black population of Britain is 3%. Black people are hugely overrepresented in lots of bad things, whether it's the prison population, stop and search, deaths in custody, being sectioned, unemployment, etc. Actually, that is very statistically naive. You have to take the right samples, as it were. You compare like with like. So, if you're looking at, yes, black people are overrepresented in prison. It's about 12%, 13% of the population. But you can't look at that in relation to the total black population. You have to look at it in relation to those involved in serious crime. And in that respect, it is not overrepresentation at all. In recent years, black people have accounted for about 20% of robbery convictions, 15% of murder convictions, and so on. So the disproportionality in a lot of these things, including stop and search, certainly in deaths in custody and being sectioned, not, however, for high rates of unemployment. Rates of unemployment, although low and falling, at least until the crisis, are higher for black people. There is evidence, the famous CV test shows that there is bias.
So if you put a CV in with the name John Smith, you're more likely to get a response than if it has an overtly black name.
Yeah. So, overall, and one of the things I was trying to say in this piece I wrote for Unheard, the online magazine, was actually that there is an optimistic story here. Oddly enough, I think that you can see the kind of, the anger of the young BLM black activists could be seen as a kind of growing pain of the new black British middle class. We now have a situation in which more young black people go to university than white people. Black children even slightly outperform whites in the government's new Progress 8 school measures. We're seeing something like 35% of British Caribbean men are now in the top 2 social classes in the sort of 7-class spectrum thing. Black people's pay is only a little bit below the white average. Now, black people, partly because they haven't been here so long, they're much less likely to have accumulated wealth. I think average wealth of a black household is about a third of that of a white one.
But from what I can gather, you're saying an awful lot of the differences, such as they do exist, can be explained by socio-economic class difference, income differences, but also the fact that again, large part of the white population of this country will have been lived here for generations, and many large parts of the black population, very recent arrivals, only mass immigration really from the 1950s onwards. So you're looking at second generation really mostly in terms of reaching a level of income and education where you're able to sort of become middle class, But also, can we look at the differences between different racial groups? And we saw this with the coronavirus in terms of, which race groups were seeing different rates of death from coronavirus. And it wasn't across the board. And we often have this thing where there are white people and then there are ethnic minorities, and they're always seen the same. But different racial groups in this country do very, very differently, even if they are recent immigrants.
Well, that's true. The most successful groups who are on average have significantly better outcomes in both education and in economic and job matters than the white average. The 2 groups that do best of all, hugely outperforming the white average, as I say, are British Chinese and British Indian, with some British Africans too have historically done very well. The groups that have historically done least well are the other parts of Black Britain, as it were, particularly African Caribbean Britain. British Pakistanis tend to to linger at the bottom of many of these outcome tables, and whites are sort of are somewhere in the middle. Yeah. That's what the story has been. But part of what I was saying is that actually we're starting to see now the kind of the black advance that other groups have been through already in this evidence of an expanding black middle class. And why I say it almost could be seen as a sort of growing pain is that I think there is undoubtedly the story that a lot of people coming out of university, and this applies to whites as well as blacks, a lot of people coming out of university, we've massively expanded higher education in the last 20 years or so. A lot of people are coming out as young graduates with expectations that are very high of high status, high paid professional employment. And a lot of them are not getting it. This applies to whites as well as blacks. It's sometimes seen as one of the driving forces behind momentum in the whole Corbyn movement. But I think it's probably true that blacks have it somewhat worse. And black graduate unemployment, although low, is higher than white graduate unemployment again before the crisis came along. And this frustration, I think, that they're not getting what they expected, so they're looking for explanations. And if you're black, you have an explanation there for you, which is to do with unconscious bias and racism in this country.
But white people don't necessarily have that. We'll have to leave it there. I could talk to you for the next hour. I think it's fascinating. Your headline, your story was about facts, not feelings. And here we are, two white middle class people talking about this issue, and there'll be people who say, well, you don't understand. But we do need to understand this not just from how people feel, and we know that there are still issues, but we do need to deal with the facts. And I think it's absolutely fascinating to talk to you about all of that.